All right, this is your review. We're going to go through this problem by problem. I guess if you don't want to see a problem, try and fast forward. So humor me with this because this is the first time I'm ever doing something like this. So, all right, in the exponent problems, as you look, scrolling up and down, one thing that we talked about is to group them to make it a little bit easier to work with. So, for instance, in problem 1, what I'm going to do is group my x's together and my y's together. And as I group them, if anything has a negative exponent, I'm going to move it into its opposite spot. So anything in the numerator would move to the denominator, and anything in the denominator would move to the numerator. So starting with the first fraction, I'm going to have an x squared. I'm going to cross it off. And then in the second fraction, I have an x to the negative second in the bottom, which I'm going to bring to the top. And that takes care of all of my x's. And now I'm going to group all my y's together. So from the first fraction, I'll take y cubed. My y to the negative fourth will move to the top. In my second fraction, the y to the fourth will stay on the top. And then in the bottom, that y to the negative third will move to the top. So if you notice, everything's in the numerator. So now I'm ready to simplify. I'm going to add the exponents in my x's. So I get x to the fourth. And then I'm going to add the exponents in my y's. So if I add them up, I get 7 and another 7. That'll give me y to the 14th. And then this ends up being the final answer. Moving on to problem 2, if you notice we have an exponent on the outside of the parentheses, this is when we do have to worry because this negative exponent is going to distribute to everything in there on the top and on the bottom. So that's what I'm going to do first. So when I do that first, I get 2 to the negative second, I get x to the negative 4, and I get y to the negative 6. And then in my denominator, I get 3 to the negative second, x to the negative 6, and then y to the negative 4th. So now that I've distributed my negative exponent through, if I'm going to organize, and again, as I organize, anything with negative exponents, which happens to be everything, is going to move. So all of my denominator will move to the top. And then everything in the numerator is going to move to the bottom. The next thing I'm going to do is actually change my 3 squared into 9 and my 2 squared into 4. And pretty much everything is simplified. The fractions, 9 over 4, I can't simplify. So I'm just going to leave it as 9 over 4. My x's, I can subtract the exponents. So I end up with x to the second on top. And with my y's, I'm going to subtract my exponents, which automatically it goes to the top. But because I have a negative exponent, what will end up happening is the negative exponent will force that y to move to the bottom. And then here's my final answer, 9x squared over 4y squared. And then finally onto the third problem of the exponents. The first thing I'm going to deal with is this parentheses. And that will turn into the cubed will go to the 2, and the cubed will go to the x, which makes it 8x cubed. And now I'm going to organize. So again, when I organize, I'm going to put all my numbers together. So 27 from the first fraction, and 4 from the first fraction. And from the second fraction, I have an 8 and a 3. Now I'm going to put my x's together. From the first fraction, I have an x to the 5th on top and an x on the bottom. I should be crossing these off as I use them. And then from the second fraction, I have an x to the 3rd on top. And now the last thing I'm going to put in there are my y's. So from the first fraction, I have a y on top. And from the second fraction, if you look, you're going to see that we have a y to the negative second on the bottom. That negative is going to move up to the top. So now I'm ready to simplify. Starting with the y's, I'm going to end up having y cubed. With my x's, I end up having 8 x's on the top, 1 on the bottom, so that becomes x to the 7th after I subtract. And then as far as my numbers go, I'm going to take 8 and divide it by 4 and make it worth 2. And then I'm going to take 27 and divide it by 3 and make it worth 9. So when I take the final 9 times 2, I end up with 18. And I don't have anything in the denominator, so I don't need the fraction bar. And that's the first part, simplifying with exponents. All right, moving on to the next part, I am either adding, subtracting, or multiplying. One thing that I like to do is add the opposite. So you're going to see that I'm doing that right now on problem number 4. And then I always like to take the smaller set of parentheses and distribute it into the larger set of parentheses. So I'm going to be taking the highlighted parentheses and distributing it into the larger one. So first I'm going to start with the x, and it's going to go to each thing. And so as I do that, I get x cubed plus 3x squared plus negative 2x. And now I'm going to take the negative 7 and distribute it through to all things. And as I do this and I'm writing my problem down, I'm going to stack my like terms. So the negative 7 to the x squared, again, this is what I'm doing, it will give me negative 7x squared. And when I take the negative 7 to the 3x, I'm going to get negative 21x. And then when I take the negative 7 to the negative 2, I'm going to get a positive 14. And now I'm ready to add my like terms, and I'm just going to put the answer straight up into the answer spot for number 4. So when I do this, I end up with x cubed plus negative 4x squared plus negative 23x and plus 14. And that's my final answer for number 4. Number 5 is one that if you want to do this the long way, what it really means is you should take 2x plus 3 times 2x plus 3, multiply those two together, and then take that times another 2x plus 3. I don't want to do all of that. So what I'm going to do is remember that I have a shortcut that will be provided to me on the test and use that. And the shortcut says I should cube the 2x. So if I cube the 2 and the x, I get 8x cubed. And then it also says I should cube the 3. And I'm going to put that in the end because I'm going to work on filling in my middle terms. But 3 cubed is 27. Now to get the 2 middle terms, what the shortcut says is I should take this 3 times the 2x and the 3. And when I do that, whoops, hold on, bear with me, that when I do that, I'm going to do this twice. And in one scenario, I'm going to square the 2x. And then the other scenario, I'm going to square the 3. So in the first scenario, when I square the 2x, that gives me 4x squared. So I have the 3 that I started with, and now 4x squared times 3. And when I multiply that all out, I'll get 36x squared. And that becomes one of my 2 new middle terms. And then in the other one, I'm going to square the 3. So I have this 3 to start with, the 2x, and now 9. And when I multiply all of my numbers here, I get 54x. And that becomes my other middle term. And so now that I'm done, I have my final answer, which I'm just going to highlight here. It's the 8x cubed, the 36x squared, the 54x, and the 27. And that's my final answer for that. Okay? All right, I'm going to take a pause here and erase some stuff so I have more room to write. All right, moving on to number 6. There is a shortcut for number 6, but again, I don't think it's really worth learning, so I'm going to go about this the normal way, which technically means I should take 2x minus 7 times another 2x minus 7, and I'm just going to FOIL or multiply, whatever you want to look at it as. So I'm going to take 2x to 2x for 4x squared. I'm going to take 2x and negative 7, which gives me negative 14x. But when I multiply the other negative 7 and 2x, I get another negative 14x. So I'm just going to go ahead and write that as negative 28x. And then the last part is negative 7 and negative 7 for 49. And then again, this is my final answer for number 6. 4x squared plus negative 28x plus 49. And finally, the last one for number 7. When I go through this one, again, I'm just going to FOIL. So 5x and 5x is 25x squared. 5x and 3 is 15x. But when I take the negative 3 and the 5x in the middle, I'll get a negative 15x. and the 15x from beginning and the negative 15x from now, they just cancel out. So I'm going to go ahead and just cross those out for you. And then I got the plus 3 at the end. So my final answer is, I'm sorry, not plus 3, plus 9. My final answer is 25x squared plus negative 9. And that's the first page. So let's move on to page 2. All right, we're on page 2 right now. The first thing I'm going to pay attention to is that I am subtracting. I am not multiplying, so don't make this problem any more than it needs to be. As far as the subtraction goes, I am going to add the opposite. So this minus x squared is going to become plus negative x squared. And when I go to the subtraction that's highlighted and I add the opposite, I need to take the opposite of everything in the parentheses behind it. So when I add the opposite and this becomes addition, this positive 2x cubed will become a negative 2x cubed. The positive x squared becomes a negative x squared, and the positive 2 becomes a negative 2. So now I'm ready to add my like terms. And as I do this, I'm going to cross things off. So I have 3x cubed and negative 2x cubed, which is just x cubed. And then I have a negative x squared and another negative x squared, which gives me negative 2x squared. And then when I go for my constants, I have a 4 and a negative 2. When I add those up, I get 2. And there's your final answer for 8. Number 9 is multiplication again, no shortcut. I do like to add the opposites, so that's what you see me doing right now. So I'm just going to FOIL or multiply. I'm going to take the x to the x and get x squared. I'm going to take x to negative 4y and get negative 4xy. And now I'm going to take the negative 3y and distribute. So when I distribute the negative 3y to the x, I get negative 3xy. And then the negative 3y to the negative 4y gives me positive 12 and then y squared. And when I look, I do see that I can add these like terms. So I'm going to go ahead and combine those. So my final answer is x squared plus negative 7xy plus 12y squared.